The night they knocked, people say some men are born to build, others to destroy. But Tranang Tin Bo, he was born to find the dead. It all started one quiet evening in the country city, a place where stories of spirits whispered louder than the wind itself. Tin Bo had just graduated from university, and like many young people fresh out of school, returned to his village with nothing but a degree, a head full of dreams, and a pocket full of nothing. No job, no interviews, just the sound of crickets and the smell of incense from his father's small altar room. His father, Tring, was known in the village as a man who could see things. Some called him a spirit medium, others said he was a fraud. But whenever someone went missing, or cows stopped eating for no reason, or a shadow passed over a newborn's crib, people came knocking. That night, they knocked again. It was just after 9 p.m. The family was finishing dinner, boiled vegetables and rice. The power had gone out again, so the only light came from a flickering candle and the reflection of the full moon through the window. Knock, knock, knock. The door rattled with urgency. Before anyone could speak, the voice came. Fki Tranang. Help. My son is missing. It was Mr. Lamb, a middle-aged man from the next hamlet. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Eyes red, shirt soaked with sweat. He clutched a photo of a young boy, Mabe, 10 years old, smiling with 2 front teeth missing. He went out to play 2 days ago. He never came back. We searched everywhere. Fields, ponds, even the old temple ruins near the mountain. Nothing. Mr. Tranang gave a heavy sigh and waved a hand. Too tired. My bones ache. Try the police. The police gave up, Mr. Lamb said. They think he drowned. But I know my son. He wouldn't go near water. Please. There was silence. Then Mr. Tranang turned to Tin Bo. You go. What? Tin Bo blinked. I don't know how to. You've watched me all your life, his father said. And besides, the spirits don't talk to me anymore. They've moved on. Maybe they'll talk to you. And that's how it began. Tin Bo didn't believe in ghosts, not really. But he knew how the old rituals worked. His father had taught him out of boredom one rainy season when he was 12. Salt lines, incense sticks, paper dolls, even how to speak to the air. He packed a flashlight, a bottle of holy water, a roll of red string, and a photo of the missing boy. The villagers directed him to the last known location, the edge of the forest, just before the graves began. This forest wasn't just any forest. It was the kind they warn kids about, full of old, twisted trees and ancient burial stones covered in moss. Every few years, someone would wander in and never come out. Tin Bo stood at the boundary for a long time. Then he stepped across. He followed the narrow dirt path, trying not to trip on roots. Crickets chirped, an owl hooted. Everything smelled wet and old. Then something changed. The air grew cold, heavy. The flashlight flickered once, twice, then held steady. He stopped walking. There it was, a small shoe, half buried in the mud. He bent down to pick it up. As soon as his fingers touched it, the air pulsed as if someone had whispered too close to his ear. Suddenly, something moved in the corner of his eye. He turned. Nothing. He looked back at the shoe. Something was scratched into the sole. A symbol he didn't recognize, 3 vertical lines crossed by a single horizontal one. It looked old. Not something a child would draw. Just then, the trees shifted. It wasn't the wind. It was the sound of movement. Slow, dragging, coming from deeper in the forest. Instinct told him to run, but curiosity rooted his feet. He turned on the voice recorder on his phone and spoke softly. Found the shoe. Heading east into the denser part of the woods. Something's off here. He walked forward. The path disappeared, replaced by soft earth and dead leaves. Branches pulled at his clothes like fingers. The deeper he went, the quieter the world became. And then heard it, crying, faint, high-pitched, like a child. It echoed through the trees, not from one direction, but many. He followed it. The sound led him to a clearing. In the center stood an old, half-collapsed stone shrine. Ivy covered its walls. Burnt incense sticks lay scattered at its base. Someone had been here recently. He stepped forward and felt something crunch underfoot. He looked down. Bones. Not human-made small animal bones, but they were arranged in a pattern. A circle. A ritual. The crying stopped, and was replaced by laughing. Cold wrong, not the laugh of a child, but something pretending to be one. From behind the shrine, a figure stepped out. At first, he thought it was a boy. The same height, same thin arms. But as it moved closer, he saw its face, or rather lack of one. No eyes, no nose, just skin, and a wide, jagged mouth. Tin Bo screamed, and through the holy water, the creature hissed, backing away into the shadows. Then it was gone. His heart pounded. He dropped to his knees, breathing hard. Suddenly, the red string in his pocket began to unravel by itself. He watched in horror as it floated upward, twisting through the air like it had a mind of its own, then zoomed off into the trees. He followed. It led him down a slope, into a forgotten ditch filled with brambles. There, at the bottom, he saw something. A small, dirt-covered hand sticking out from the earth. He froze, then began to dig. It took him half an hour. Mud clung to his fingers. Mosquitoes bit at his neck. But eventually, he uncovered a tiny body. It was the missing boy, but his face was wrong, frozen in terror. His fingers bent in unnatural directions. Eyes wide open, mouth agape, like he died mid-scream. There was something else too. Scratched into his chest, same symbol from the shoe. Tin Bo called the authorities. They took the body. Mr. Lamb wept until his voice gave out. But for Tin Bo, the story didn't end there. That night, he had a dream. He was standing in the same forest clearing. The shrine was whole again. Candles burned on its stone steps. In front of him stood the faceless child. But this time it spoke. Its mouth didn't move, but its voice echoed inside his head. You found me, but not all of me. Tin Bo woke in a cold sweat. His body hurt like he'd been running all night, and on his desk lay the red string, neatly coiled. He never brought it back. The missing boy and the last footprints on Burial Hill, in a village where the dead sometimes spoke louder than the living. Stories moved like wind through bamboo, quiet first, then rattling with a noise you couldn't ignore. After the recovery of young Quay's body in the forest, whispers began. Some believed it was a tragic accident. Others knew better. They said something buried that child, something that wasn't human. But Tin Bo couldn't shake the dream. The faceless child, the shrine. You found me, but not all of me. And then, the red string. He hadn't brought it back, but it had returned, curled neatly on his desk, without a speck of dirt. That wasn't coincidence. It was invitation. A few days later, Mr. Lamb returned to thank him. The village held a simple ceremony to honor the child. The air felt heavier than usual that day, as if the spirits themselves were watching. Q was last seen near the old Burial Hill, Mr. Lamb said during the offering. But we never searched there. Everyone's too afraid. The Burial Hill, Tin Bo asked. ZMM, Mr. Lamb nodded. Behind the pagoda ruins. They say anyone who steps on it after sunset sees things. That night, curiosity got the better of him. He packed a lantern, the red string, and a new set of incense sticks. This time, He brought along his father's old spiritual journal, a faded notebook full of drawings, notes, and strange markings. The burial hill wasn't far. It rose like a hump behind the collapsed pagoda ruins. Wild grass hiding ancient graves with barely visible stone markers. No names, just worn symbols. He stood at the bottom of the hill and waited. The sun dipped low. Shadows stretched. The crickets fell silent. Then he stepped forward. The moment his foot touched the hill, the lantern dimmed. He climbed slowly, each step sinking into soft, spongy earth. Halfway up, something caught his eye: footprints. Small, bare, leading further up the hill. He crouched down, tracing them with a stick. The prints were fresh to fresh, still defined in the dirt, not yet blown away by wind or covered by dew. He followed them. They led him to the top of the hill, where 3 gravestones leaned together like old friends. One was cracked. One was missing entirely. The third. He stopped. The third was different, newer, but with no name, just a single carved mark, 3 vertical lines, crossed by one horizontal line. The same mark from Kuei's shoe, the same one carved into his chest. His pulse quickened. He stepped closer. Suddenly, a breeze whipped past, hymened with it, a whisper. He turned. Standing a few feet away was a woman in white. She wore a long audai, to clean for someone on a burial hill. Her hair was long, almost covering her face. She pointed at the unmarked grave and said one word: "Dig." Before he could respond, she was gone. No footsteps, no sound, just vanished. His hands trembled, but he obeyed. He retrieved the small travel spade from his bag and knelt beside the grave. The earth was unusually soft, almost like someone had dug it up recently and covered it again. Within minutes, the blade hit something solid. He cleared away more dirt, not a body. A wooden box. He opened it. Inside were 3 objects: a child's tooth, a torn red ribbon, and a small wooden carving of a human figure, but with no face. As he touched the carving, the wind roared to life. The grass around the hill flattened. The lantern blew out, and somewhere in the darkness, a child laughed. Not joyfully, mockingly. He grabbed the box and ran down the hill, nearly tripping over the stones. When he reached home, he placed the items on his father's altar and began flipping through the spiritual journal. He found it, a page titled, "The Offering of the Unrested." It read, "When the dead are taken unjustly, and the ritual is broken, the soul divides. One half seeks peace, the other seeks revenge. Until they are reunited, neither will sleep." He looked at the 3 items. The boy in the forest, that was only half of Q. The other half was still bound to the hill, and something else was protecting it. That night, he had another dream. This time, he stood inside the ruined pagoda. Rain poured through the broken roof. At the far end of the hall, someone sat cross-legged, facing away. He walked closer. The person's back was covered in burns, skin peeling like old bark. The air smelled of smoke and incense. He reached out to touch the figure's shoulder. It turned. It was Q, but twisted, eyes black, skin cracked, mouth sewn shut with red thread. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out, only blood. Then the figure pointed at Tinbo's chest. He woke up screaming, and on his chest, drawn in charcoal, was the symbol again. He visited the burial hill the next morning in daylight. Everything was calm, but something had changed. The footprints were gone, the box and the grave empty. Someone had been here after him. He turned to leave, but something in the corner of his eye stopped him. A movement behind the pagoda. He stepped carefully round the stone wall. There, beneath a banyan tree, was a small altar. Fresh incense, a bowl of rice, and a handwritten note weighed down by a pebble. It read, "Leave the dead alone. Some bodies are not meant to be found." The handwriting looked familiar. He stuffed the note in his pocket and headed straight home. When he showed it to his father, the old man said nothing, just stared at the rice bowl on the note, then whispered, "That's a death offering. Whoever left that doesn't want you near the hill." Tin Bo leaned in. "You know something?" His father sighed. "There was another child, years ago, also disappeared near ZMM. No one found the body, but every few years someone sees a figure in white standing near the graves." Tin Bo's mind raced. "The woman, I saw her too. She doesn't help," his father said. "She warns. She protects what's buried." "Then why did she tell me to dig?" His father shook his head. "Sometimes the dead want to be found. Sometimes they want to pull you in." That evening, he couldn't sit still. His hands kept returning to the wooden carving. The smooth wood, the blank face. He wrapped it in red string, sealed it in a jar of salt, and placed it on the altar. But at midnight, the jar shattered. No wind, no vibration, just exploded. He checked the carving. A crack had appeared down its center. From the split, black liquid seeped out like ink, thick and slow. And then came the knocking. 3 slow knocks on his window. He opened the curtain. No one. But on the ground outside, barefoot child-sized footprints, leading away, toward the mountain. He grabbed his coat and flashlight and followed. The path curved past the rice fields, through thick brush, until it opened up into an old graveyard no one had used in decades. At the center stood a small stone well. The footprints ended there. He leaned over the edge and shone the light down. At first, nothing. Then movement. Something pale drifting just below the surface. A face, not decomposed, not bloated, staring straight up. And just before the light flickered out again, he saw another wooden carving, floating beside the body. But this one had a face, his own, the broken comb and the shadow behind the tree. They say when the dead leave behind pieces of themselves, they're not done. And when those pieces begin showing up in places they don't belong, it means something is following you, something that hasn't finished what it started. Tin Bo didn't sleep after finding the second wooden figure. The face carved into Ithis own stirred up from the well like a silent warning. He hadn't told his father. He didn't know how to. Instead, he spent the next day walking the old trails around the village, trying to think. He wandered past forgotten shrines, bamboo groves, and rice fields turning gold in the summer light. He was passing the edge of the woods near the burial hill again when he saw it. A glint of something in the grass. He stepped off the path, brushing aside tall weeds and dried vines. There, almost hidden beneath a patch of moss and rotting leaves, was a comb. Old wooden, ornately carved, but broken in half, jagged where it snapped, and along one tooth a dark red smear. He picked it up carefully. The wood felt oddly warm, sticky. Blood, still fresh. He turned to look behind him and froze. A shadow, just past the nearest tree. Tall, slender, motionless. It didn't sway with the wind. It didn't blink. It didn't breathe. Tin Bo took a step forward, eyes fixed on the tree. The shadow didn't move, but something in his body, every hair on his neck, every muscle in his leg screamed, "Run." He turned around. Nothing behind him. He looked back. The shadow was gone. Only the tree remained, its bark cracked like burnt skin. That night, he returned home with the broken comb wrapped in cloth. He placed it on the altar beside the 2 wooden figures and the old red string. He lit incense and sat cross-legged, flipping again through his father's journal. One passage caught his eye. Comb of the forgotten. often left behind by spirits bound to grief. If found broken and stained, it may mark the site of betrayal. Betrayal. The word echoed in his head. Who had been betrayed? He slept lightly that night, and when he finally drifted off, the dreams returned. But this time, it wasn't the child. It was a woman, wearing white, hair long and wet, hanging like ropes. She sat before a cracked mirror, brushing her hair with a broken comb, her reflection flickering like candlelight. As she brushed, she bled. Blood trickled from her scalp, her hands, her mouth. She turned to look at Hyman, her face blurred like smoke. "Why did they lie?" she whispered. "They buried the wrong one." He jolted awake. The candle beside the altar had gone out. The red string had unraveled again, this time wrapped tightly around the broken comb. Tin Bo knew he couldn't ignore it anymore. The next morning, he returned to where he found the comb. He retraced his steps carefully, eyes scanning the ground for anything he'd missed. The air was oddly still, no birds, no insects, just silence. Then, by the tree where the shadow had stood, he found something else. A red ribbon, torn, frayed at one end, caught on a branch barely knee-high. He pocketed it and kept walking, further into the woods. Not far beyond the tree, he stumbled across something that didn't belong, a patch of earth that looked disturbed. Someone had dug here recently. The dirt was loose, uneven, flattened to cleanly on top. He knelt and touched the ground. Still soft. He didn't need a shovel. He dug with his hands. Minutes passed. Then he hit something solid wood. Another box? No. A coffin. Tiny. He brushed away the soil and saw what remained of an old child-sized casket. Weather-worn and slightly cracked. This wasn't Quay's resting place. Someone else had been buried here. Quietly. Secretly. He opened it. Inside, bones, small, fragile, and beside them a second broken comb, identical to the one he found. And beneath the comb, a silk handkerchief, embroidered with a name faded by time, L. A woman's name. He returned home and confronted his father. "Did someone named L die here?" he asked. Mr. Trenang didn't respond immediately. He stared at the altar, lips pressed thin. After a long silence, he said, "Elle was a servant girl, years ago, before you were born. Worked at the pagoda before it burned down. She died there. No one knows," his father said. "The pagoda caught fire one night. People said she ran inside to save a child trapped in the flames. But no body was ever found. No funeral, no grave." Tin Bo placed the broken comb on the altar. "Then whose bones are in that casket?" His father looked at the comb, eyes suddenly wide. "Where did you find that?" "In the woods, near ZMM. Mr. Trenang stood slowly. "You weren't supposed to go there." Tin Bo's voice rose. "Then why are there children buried there? Why are they showing up in my dreams?" His father hesitated, then whispered, "Because someone didn't want them to be remembered." That night, the dreams came again. But this time, it wasn't just one spirit. It was many. Dozens of faceless children standing in a row, all holding combs, all brushing air. And in the center stood her face clear now. Her eyes were kind, but broken, full of mourning. She pointed to the children, then to the forest, then to him. "You opened it," she said softly. "You woke them." The next morning, he went back to the burial hill. He brought incense, the combs, and a bell. When he reached the top, he knelt beside the nameless grave and began a ritual only from the journal. It was called the Ceremony of Light Returning. He rang the bell, lit incense, spoke the names he knew, L, the rest he didn't. Then a sound, like wind, but lower, deeper, breathing. He opened his eyes. Across from him, under the banyan tree, stood the shadow again. Only now, it had shape. A man, tall, wearing a ceremonial robe, face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Not a ghost, a spirit medium, or something pretending to be one. The figure pointed at the broken combs on the altar, then tilted its head, slowly, and whispered, "You took what was buried." Tinbo's breath caught. "Who are you?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised one hand, and from the shadows behind it, the faceless child emerged again, crawling like an insect. Its mouth opened, and from it came a single name, L. Then they vanished. That night, he returned home to find his room in disarray. The red string had tied itself into a knot shaped like the symbol. The salt around the altar had been scattered, and in the center of the room, a third wooden figure. This time, not a child, not himself. His father, calling spirits in the graveyard a chilling response. Tinbo stood alone under the withering moonlight, the winds sweeping through the cemetery like whispers from the dead. Round him, crooked tombstones jutted from the earth like broken teeth. He hadn't planned on coming back to this place so soon, but desperation had outpaced his fear. The ritual instructions had been hastily scrawled on an old piece of rice paper, given to him by his father before the man went back to sleep, as if nothing strange had ever happened. "If you really want to help them," his father had murmured, "don't just walk. Ask. Ask the spirits themselves." Now, standing at the edge of the honked abandoned burial, Hilton Bo felt the foolishness of his choice, but it was too late to turn back. He knelt on a patch of dry earth between two graves. The photograph of the missing boy, Q, was placed in front of him, along with 3 sticks of incense, a small bowl of rice, and a shot of rice wine. He lit the incense, watching the smoke curl upward in nervous spirals. Then, following the instructions, he whispered, "If you are here, tell me where you are. Let me bring peace to your soul." Silence, then wind. A gust rushed past him, blowing the incense smoke straight toward an ancient tree at the far edge of the hill. That tree where he'd earlier found the broken comb and seen that shadow. He looked toward it instinctively, but saw nothing. Still, a chill crawled up his spine. He repeated the words again, this time louder, more firm. "If anyone hears me, if any soul is restless, please answer." Nothing. Then something moved. Behind the tree. It wasn't a rustle. It wasn't an animal. It was the sound of feet dragging through dry leaves. Tinbo froze. His heart pounded so loud he couldn't hear his own breath. He stood, barely able to keep his voice from cracking. "Who's there?" No answer. But then he heard it again, dragging footsteps closer now. His instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs stayed rooted in place. And then, a voice, a child's voice, barely above a whisper. "I'm cold." Tinbo spun around. There, standing several feet behind him, was a boy no older than 10. Hair matted, skin pale, clothes torn. He looked translucent, like fog given form. "Q," Tinbo choked out. The boy nodded slowly, but his eyes were blank, empty. Like he wasn't seeing Tinbo at all, he was looking through him. "I'm cold," the boy repeated. Tinbo took a step forward, hand trembling. "Where are you? Where's your body?" But the boy didn't answer. Instead, he turned and pointed toward the base of the old tree. Then, just like that, he vanished, gone in a blink, as if swallowed by the darkness. Tinbo stood still, heart pounding, barely believing what he had just seen. Had the ritual worked? Had he actually called the spirit of the missing boy? He didn't wait to question it. Racing to the tree, he dropped to his knees and started clearing away leaves, broken branches, and chunks of dry earth with his bare hands. Sweat dripped down his temples despite the cold. His fingernails cracked against stone and root. Then he felt it. Cloth. Dirty, stiff cloth. And beneath it, something cold and soft. He scraped more. A hand. He staggered back, breath caught in his throat. It was a body. He vomited to the side, then stumbled to his feet. His mind screamed to run to the village, to call Samiani and Yobit before he could take another step. A voice rang out. A whisper, barely carried on the wind. You shouldn't have found me. He turned. No one. But then he noticed something. Shadows around the graves were longer than they should have been. Darker, moving even though the wind had stopped. One of them lifted its head. It was a woman. Pale skin, long black hair dragging behind her like a funeral train. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes pure white. She hovered just above the ground. No footsteps. No sound. What do you want? Tinbo stammered, stepping back. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she reached out a hand, pointing not at him, but at the spot where the boy's body lay. You disturbed the ground, she whispered, her voice like dead leaves scraping against stone. This is not your place. I was trying to help, he shouted. He needed to be found. The woman's head tilted to one side, almost curiously. Then, behind her, more shapes began to appear, figures rising from the mists of the graves, old and young, men and women, all staring at him. You saw him, the woman hissed. That was not allowed. Tinbo tried to speak, but the air felt thick now, like he was breathing underwater. The woman moved closer. Once you see us, we see you. Suddenly, her face changed, her mouth tearing wide open into a gaping black maw, her eyes turning blood red. Tinbo ran. He didn't know how he found the path back to the village. Branches tore at his arms, roots caught his feet, but he kept moving. The shrieks of the dead behind him growing louder and louder, until they faded into silence. When he finally burst into his family's front yard, he collapsed onto the ground, gasping. His father was already waiting. You saw them, didn't you? The old man asked quietly. Tinbo nodded, too shaken to speak. His father helped him inside, made him drink hot tea laced with something bitter, and placed protective talismans round the room. You called, and something answered, the old man said. But it wasn't just the boy. There are things buried in that hill that should never be disturbed. I found him, Tinbo whispered. The boy. He showed me where he was. His father looked at him grimly. Then you must finish it. You brought light to his sound or help him cross over. But beware, the others will try to follow. Tinbo couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, the woman in the cemetery, mouth wide, eyes glowing. And always, behind her, more shadows. At some point near dawn, he heard it again. A whisper, right outside his window. I'm cold. He opened his eyes, and saw the boy's face pressed against the glass, expressionless, lips barely moving. I'm cold. Then the face was gone. The guide in the night, was he even human? The moon was high that night, veiled behind ragged clouds like a watchful eye peeking through torn curtains. The cemetery lay in absolute silence, too silent, as if the ground itself held its breath. Tinbo stood frozen on the edge of the overgrown path, clutching the broken comb still wrapped in a scrap of cloth. His heart hadn't stopped racing since the failed calling ritual earlier that evening. He had felt its emething responded, and now something else was coming. From the edge of the foggy path, a figure emerged. An old man, hunched, dressed in a dark, threadbare shirt and loose pants that hung like forgotten curtains over bony legs. His hands clutched a gnarled walking stick, more root than wood. His face was shadowed under a conical straw hat, tilted too low to see his eyes, but Tin Bo noticed the slight tilt of the head, as if the old man had been watching him for some time. "You're looking for the boy, aren't you?" the man croaked, his voice dry and gritty like wind scraping bark. Tin Bo instinctively stepped back. "Who are you?" The old man didn't answer. Instead, he raised one trembling hand and pointed towards the hills beyond the burial grounds. "I know where the child lies. He wants to go home." Tin Bo's mouth went dry. Part of him screamed to run. The other half part, drowning in desperation, held him in place. "You saw him?" he asked. "You know where Q is?" The old man gave a slow, painful nod. "But it's not far. We should go before the rooster crows." There was something unnatural about his words. People in the village often used the rooster's crow to mark time, but here, it felt like a warning. Tin Bo looked back toward the village, then toward the foggy hills. Finally, he nodded. "Take me." The old man turned without another word and began walking. The path they followed was narrow and wild, overgrown with weeds and vines that reached for Tin Bo's ankles like tiny hands. Crickets had stopped chirping. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Every few minutes, Tin Bo glanced ahead, trying to keep track of the man's shuffling figure. But the old man moved faster than expected, disappearing behind trees only to reappear farther ahead, as if the forest bent around him. "Where are we going exactly?" Tin Bo called out. No answer. "Is the boy still alive?" Still nothing. Only the sound of dry leaves crunching under his own footsteps. But the strange part, the truly chilling part, was that Tin Bo couldn't hear the old man's footsteps at all. They climbed a small ridge where the cemetery ended and the land dipped into a sunken grove of trees. It was a place Tin Bo had never noticed before, even though he'd walked these lands his entire childhood. At the center of the grove was a small mound of earth, freshly turned, damp, as if someone had buried something there just hours ago. Tin Bo's throat tightened. "This wasn't here before," he said aloud, half to himself. "No," the old man said quietly, "because the dead only rest when they are remembered." Tin Bo stepped closer. The dirt had been piled hastily, no incense, no offering bowl, no marker. Just a shallow rise, barely protected from the elements. "Is he in there?" The old man didn't answer immediately. "Do you have something of his?" Tin Bo hesitated, then unwrapped the blood-stained comb from the cloth. The old man reached out, not to take it, but to gently lower Tin Bo's hand, guiding the comb to rest atop the grave. And then, something in the air shifted. The wind began to stir, leaves rustled, the trees groaned, and from somewhere deep in the earth came a low, muffled sound. A child's sob. Tin Bo stumbled back, his hands shaking. "Did you hear that?" The old man simply nodded. "He's still here, but he's cold. He's alone." Suddenly, a memory returned to Tin Bo. Something his grandmother once said in a hushed voice: "If someone dies before their time, and their body isn't found, their soul wanders, trapped between worlds." And now this mound, this forgotten patch of earth, that made sense. Tin Bo dropped to his knees. "We have to dig him up, give him a proper burial. He was just a kid." But when he looked up again, the old man was gone. Vanished. No footsteps, no rustling, nothing. Just the stillness of the forest and the newly made grave in front of him. Morning came slowly, filtering through the canopy in dappled light. By then, Tin Bo was half covered in dirt, his hands raw and blistered from digging with only a rock. But when the last clump of soil was pulled away, he froze. There, wrapped in a school sweater and faded shorts, was the small body of Q. Eyes closed, lips blue, but peaceful. A comb lay beside him, untouched by soil, as if placed there just seconds ago. Tin Bo wept, not just for the boy, but for the dread that filled his gut. Because now came the questions. Who buried the boy? Who led him here? And why had no one seen this grave before? That afternoon, he returned to the village with help. People gasped, some cried, others simply whispered in disbelief. The police reopened the case, but no one could explain how the boy ended up the roarer who had buried him. When Tin Bo tried to describe the old man, a few of the elders exchanged nervous glances. One of them, a woman in her 80s, pulled him aside. "The man you saw," she said, eyes wide. "Did he wear a conical hat? Did he limp when he walked?" Tin Bo nodded. She swallowed. "That sounds like old Ba Van. He lived here decades ago, used to tend the graveyard. But he died during the war, buried just past the ridge where the boy was found." Tin Bo's knees went weak. "No, that's not possible. He spoke to me." The old woman touched his arm gently. "Sometimes, the ones who cared for the dead don't stop caring just because they've passed." That night, unable to sleep, Tin Bo returned to the ridge. He brought incense, fruit, and water, not just for Queb but for the old man too. He found the spot marked as Bavan's grave. It was overgrown, nearly forgotten. He knelt. "Thank you," he whispered. The wind stirred again, soft this time, and in the trees behind him, just for a second, he thought he saw the silhouette of a man with a straw hat walking away. Not limping, not shuffling, just moving on. But as Tin Bo turned to leave, something glinted in the grass near Bavan's grave. A string, thin red, and tied at the end was a child's tooth. His heart dropped. That wasn't Quay's. There was more. Opening the grave at midnight, there was more than one inside the coffin. The air was cold, colder than it should have been for that time of year. A ring of villagers, holding flashlights and oil lanterns, gathered in a tense silence round the freshly discovered grave. The old man who led Tin Bo to the site was nowhere to be found. No one had seen him leave. One moment he was standing next to Bo, the next, he was simply gone like a shadow swallowed by the fog. Some of the elders whispered among themselves, insisting it was a bad omen to disturb the dead at midnight. But the child's parents, faces drawn and pale, had already made up their minds. That was their son buried there, of that they were sure. A rusty shovel pierced the damp earth. The first scoop of soil hit the side with a muffled thud. The digging continued. It took them nearly an hour to reach the coffin. Every strike of the shovel seemed to echo with unease. The wooden casket was small, too small for an adult, just right for a child. Tin Bo's heart pounded as he stepped closer. Something about the air, it felt heavier, thicker, like it didn't want them to go any further. But they did. Two men pried open the lid. A choked scream burst from one of the villagers, and the mother fainted on the spot. Inside, the cold remains of little Q were unmistakable. His tiny hands were crossed over his chest, and his school uniform, though faded and damp, was still clinging to his body. But that wasn't the worst part. Along the edges of the coffin, packed between the boy's limbs and under the lining, were clumps of hair, long, grayish strands, tangled and decaying. And beside the boy's feet lay a bundle wrapped in red cloth. One of the men picked it up with shaking hands. When unwrapped, what spilled out was a collection of fingernails and toenail chic, yellowed, curled. Not the boy's. These belonged to someone older, much older. What is this?" One of the villagers gasped, nearly dropping his lantern. An old woman stepped forward. Her name was Bancm, known for her knowledge of old rites and dark stories passed down generations. She didn't speak for a long time, just stared into the coffin, eyes narrowed. "This is, get me," she finally whispered. "What does that mean?" Tin Bo asked. "Grave binding," BANCM explained, her voice shaky. In the past, some believed that binding the soul of a child to that of an elder could grant the elder rebirth or immortality in the next life. A twisted belief, long forbidden. But who would do something like that? Another villager asked, stepping back in horror. "No one sane," she said flatly, "and certainly no one still alive. Unless they practice the old ways." Bo's mind raced. Could the mysterious old man have been part of this? The body of little Q was removed with care, but nobody dared touch the other remains. There wasn't enough flesh to identify them, only remnant offerings, perhaps a dark ritual. The bundle of nails and hair was placed in a separate urn, to be burned. But BANCM warned them, burning it might not be enough. Whoever performed the Getma may not have finished what they started. That night, the village didn't sleep. The wind howled, dogs barked endlessly at empty corners, lanterns flickered, even the electric ones. And Tin Bo, lying alone in his room, couldn't shake the image of the coffin. Something had shifted, the air itself felt cursed. 3 days later, strange things began happening. Quay's body had been reburied in a proper ceremony. His parents insisted on moving him to the family plot, far from the mysterious hill. But during the funeral, several people noticed something strange. The soil kept sinking like something beneath was trying to pull the coffin down. Then, at night, his mother woke screaming. She swore she heard small footsteps in the hallway. Bare feet, wet. The father dismissed it at first until he saw tiny handprints on the inside of their window. Outside, 2 nights later, Tin Bo received a knock at his door. It was BANCM, pale, sweating. "You have to come, now." "I saw it." "Saw what?" "The woman, the one from the grave. She's not done." They returned to the Gravino sealed and blessed. But BANCM brought incense, chicken blood, and an old mirror wrapped in red cloth. She explained, if the soul of the elder wasn't fully bound, it might linger, angry, searching for a new host. "A host?" Bo asked. "She died wanting life, and if she didn't get it from the child, she might take it from someone else." Lightning flashed in the distance, though the sky was clear just moments ago. BANCM held up the mirror and began chanting in a dialect Bo didn't recognize. The wind around them picked up unnaturally fast. The trees swayed, but the air smelled rotten. Suddenly, the mirror cracked, and just behind them near the edge of the grave a shadow moved. They spun around. A woman stood there. Her long, damp hair clung to her face. Her eyes were pure black, hollow pits that seemed to suck in the light. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stood, watching. Tin Bo's legs locked in place. BANCM threw the blood toward her and screamed, "Try VAI, Engui King GG Sich Ni Bay." The shadow vanished, but the air stayed cold. "We have to find who did this," BANCM said through gritted teeth. "Someone prepared that ritual. Someone in this village." They began asking questions quietly. Elderly villagers whispered of a woman who used to live alone by the edge of the woods. Her name was Badu. No one had seen her in over 2 years. When Bo and BANCM reached her old hut, it was falling apart, yet the inside was untouched. Jars filled with animal parts, symbols etched into walls, and a photo. A black and white portrait of the same hunched old man who led Tin Bo to the grave. "This," Bo whispered, "this is him." BANCM clenched her jaw. "That's her father. He died 30 years ago." Bo's blood ran cold. "Then who? What?" Did I follow that night? The room's candle blew out without warning. They left immediately, locking the place behind them. But as they walked away, Tin Bo looked back just once. In the shadow of the trees stood that old man again, watching. He smiled, not kindly, but knowingly. The widow's curse, a cold case reopened. When the coffin was forced open, and the brittle bones of the old woman were brought to light, no one in the village felt triumphant. Instead, something unspoken settled heavily in the air. The grave of the widowed Baekam, rumored to have murdered her only son decades ago, had been disturbed during the investigation into Little Quay's death. Not as a formality, but out of desperation. It was the way her fingernails had been found inside Quay's coffin, alongside strands of coarse, long white hair. She had been dead for 27 years, yet somehow, a part of her had ended up in the same coffin as a child she never met. Tin Bo didn't sleep the night they unearthed her. Neither did most of the villagers. The air had turned clammy, and a foul, sour smell clung to the wind. Dogs began howling deep, mournful howls that echoed down alleys and through bamboo groves. One by one, lights in the village blinked back on, as frightened residents peeked from behind locked doors. At 3 a.m., a baby in the southern part of the village began screaming. His mother, pale and shaking, said he had stood up in the crib still asleep and whispered, "Muccm, Mg Khan. Khan say," over and over. By dawn, 6 other families reported that their children had walked in their sleep. Each child, aged between 3 and 7, mumbled something about a woman named CCM. One girl, a 5-year-old named Han, had even drawn a picture using red crayon on the wall. An old woman with a sharp chin, wearing a tattered scarf, standing beneath a hanging tree. Behind her, a small boy floated above a grave. No one had told these children anything. Tin Bo stood outside the crumbling remains of Baccm's house, which had been abandoned since her death. The thatched roof had collapsed long ago, but the bamboo fence still stood crookedly, as if resisting time itself. He remembered the stories his father used to tell in hushed tones, the kind that adults only share when they think kids aren't listening. Baccm had once been the village's herbalist. People came to her for remedies, prayers, and blessings. But after her son died, mysterious life found drowned in the irrigation canal. With his throat bruised, everything changed. The villagers whispered that she had done it herself in a fit of madness, grieving the loss of her husband. Some said it was a sacrifice. Others said she simply snapped. No trial was ever held, but the village turned against her. She died alone, never speaking another word to anyone. Tin Bo reached into his pocket and pulled out the piece of bone they had found in Quay's coffin, confirmed to be human, likely from a hand. He clenched his jaw. He needed answers. That evening, he visited Ang Se, one of the oldest men in the village. Nearly blind but sharp-minded, Ang, Tin Bo said softly, placing the bone shard on the old man's mat. "You were here when she died, when her son died. Tell me what happened." The old man stared at the fragment with sunken eyes. After a moment, he said, "She was never the one who needed fear." Tin Bo blinked. "What do you mean?" Ang Se took a trembling breath. "She didn't kill the boy. She protected him from something far worse." "Worse than being murdered?" Tin Bo asked. "Worse than dying," the old man whispered. He told a story Tin Bo had never heard before. The son, Ka, was a strange boy, quiet, always sickly, but he often spoke to things no one could see. One night, he told Baccm that someone was calling him to the bamboo grove behind their house. That night, he vanished. 3 days later, his body was found, but not where the villagers thought. It was BACCM who carried him back. She never explained where she found him. She burned everything in her house after that, Angsay said. Clothes, bedding, even the mats. Said she was cleansing evil. What did the villagers do? They didn't care. They just saw a madwoman with a dead son. Tin Bo felt a chill creep up his spine. What happened to her after that? He asked. She buried something in the yard. A small wooden box. Said it would keep the darkness from spreading. That night, Tin Bo returned to the widow's ruins, armed with a flashlight and a spade. He stepped over the warped fence and began digging near the largest tree stump in the yard. The earth was surprisingly soft. Within an hour, his spade hit something hard. A wooden box. He gently pulled it up. The wood had blackened with time, but it was sealed tight with rusted nails. Taking a deep breath, he pried it open. Inside were three things: a lock of hair tied with red thread, a child's marble toy, and a tightly wrapped scroll of old rice paper. He unfolded the scroll. It read, "If the boy returns, the debt is not yet paid. The hunger will come again. I offer myself so the cycle ends. Let them hate me, but let them live." Signed, CCM. Tin Bo stood frozen. The widow had offered herself to something, to break a curse, to end a cycle. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the clearing, extinguishing his flashlight. In the darkness, he heard it, a soft, rasping breath, not behind him, but beside. Then, a whisper, "It's not over." The following days plunged the village into chaos. 3 more children fell ill with fevers that left them delirious. They all mumbled in their sleep about graves, trees, and a woman who watched from their windows. One child was found standing in the rice paddies at dawn, barefoot, shivering, and repeating, "She's waiting for her son. She wants him back." The village chief called for the pagoda monk, Fkidi, who had retired years ago after witnessing a possession case too horrifying to discuss. But now, they needed him. Fkidi arrived with incense, amulets, and a face marked by fear. "This land carries a stain," he said after examining the cemetery, BACCM's grave, and the scroll. "She bound something, and now that the seal is broken, it seeks a new vessel." Who? Tin Bo asked. The monk turned slowly toward him. "You." That night, Tin Bo felt it. In his bones, in his blood, a strange heaviness behind his eyes, a pressure in his chest, as if something was pressing from within. He dreamt of a field of graves endless, stretching far beyond the hills. In the center, a small boy stood, crying. BACCM knelt beside him, gently stroking his hair. "She gave everything to keep it away," the boy said. "Then why are you here?" Tin Bo asked. The boy looked up, his eyes black as ink. "Because someone dug me up." Tin Bo woke up gasping. The next morning, the temple bell rang 6 times unusual, as it typically rang only at dawn or during funerals. At the pagoda gate, a small bundle was left. Wrapped inside was the same red-threaded lock of hair Tin Bo had found in the box. But now, it was soaked in something dark, fresh blood. No one knew who brought it. But the message was clear. The curse had not ended. It had only just begun. Following the dream, a hand reaching out from the pond. The sky was still cloaked in midnight black when Tin Bo bolted upright in bed, drenched in sweat. His chest heaved, his ears still echoing with the voice that had called out in the dream. "Bo, help me." It was Quay's voice, thin, wet, and choked with despair. But it wasn't just a voice. In the dream, Bo had seen him, his small body pale and bloated, floating on a still pond under a blood-red moon. The water was dark, its surface like oil. And just as Tin Bo tried to reach him, Quay's lifeless arm had lifted, stretching out. fingers trembling toward the shore. Then the eyes opened milky white and locked with Beau's. That was when he woke up. Still shaking, Tin Bo grabbed a flashlight and rushed out into the Perdon fog, ignoring his mother's groggy calls from the back room. "Where are you going?" "I'll be back. Stay inside." The path out of the village was drenched in dew, the dirt road muddy from last night's rain. Beau's shoes squelched with every step as he followed the direction. From his dream south of the graveyard, toward the overgrown pond behind the old sugarcane fields. No one went there anymore. It was said to be cursed, the same pond where, decades ago, a woman had drowned herself holding her newborn child. People whispered that her cries could still be heard on moonless nights. As Beau neared the edge of the water, he slowed down. Everything was exactly like in the dream. The same twisted willow tree, the same patch of broken reeds, the same stone with moss growing over half of it. The pond, motionless, reflected nothing but the thick gray clouds above. A chill ran down Beau's spine. Every part of him screamed to turn back, but he stepped closer. Then he saw it. A pale handsmall, childlet jetting out from beneath the surface, fingers stiff and pointing straight up. His breath caught. He nearly dropped the flashlight. The dream hadn't been a dream. Beau stumbled forward, splashing into the shallow edge, and reached for the hand. The water was icy. As he grabbed it, he realized with horror it was real. Cold, lifeless, still. He yelled for help, loud, desperate. Within minutes, villagers came rushing. Flashlights, shouts, splashing feet. Together, they pulled the small body out of the pond. It was Q, and he had been dead for days. But what terrified everyone wasn't just that. It was the position of his body, arms crossed over his chest like a funeral pose, mouth open as if mid-scream. But worst of all, in his hand, clutched tightly even in death, was a lock of long gray hair. Someone had placed him there. Someone who didn't want him found. Beau couldn't stop shaking. This wasn't just an accident. This was ritualistic. And that meant only one thing. Someone in the village had done it. The local police arrived by dawn. They asked questions, took photos, and covered the boy's body with a sheet. But even they seemed unnerved more by the crowd of villagers whispering about curses and ghosts than the corpse itself. Beau stayed silent. He didn't tell them about the dream. Instead, he returned home, numb and exhausted. He sat on the wooden floor of his room, replaying everything, the dream, the hand, the hair, and then his eyes drifted to the altar where his father's portrait stood. "Ba, was this what you meant when you told me to call for the spirits?" He remembered the saints how something had responded. How after that night, the old man had appeared, leading him to the grave that shouldn't exist. It was all connected. Q, the old widow, the unmarked grave, and now this. That night, Beau couldn't sleep. He lay still, ears straining at every sound. Dogs barked again just like after the grave was dug up. The air in the village had grown heavy, like something unseen pressing down on every rooftop. At 2 a.m., the temperature dropped sharply. His window fogged up, though it had been open all night. And then, once more, he heard it. Beau. He sat up, frozen. It came from the backyard. This time, it wasn't a dream. Grabbing a jacket, he tiptoed outside. The moon was hidden behind clouds. The grass was wet. He stepped softly, barefoot, across the uneven stones toward the garden where his father used to burn incense. There just beyond the fence stood a figure. Small, slight. It looked like Q, but the head was tilted at an unnatural angle. And the voice, when it came again, was deeper, hollow. Not finished, not yet. Then it vanished. No footsteps, no rustle, just gone. The next morning, Tin Bo went straight to the village temple. The head monk, Fgijek, was already waiting. The old man had seen him coming. "You've been dreaming of the dead," the monk said calmly. Bo froze. "How did you know?" "You've stepped into something old, boy, older than this village, older than that pond. The land remembers. Is that why this is happening?" Fgijek nodded. "Many years ago, a woman was accused of drowning her own child. She swore she was innocent, but the village, in fear, buried her without proper rites together with cursed items. Hair, nails, blood. Her spirit has never left. And the boy? The curse needs a vessel, a life taken in innocence. Someone must have guided it." "You mean someone helped the curse?" The monk didn't answer directly, but his silence said everything. Later that afternoon, Bo returned to the site where Kuei's body had been found. The pond was calm again, as if nothing had happened. But in the dirt near the edge, he noticed something. Footprints. Small, bare, too small for an adult. They led not toward the village but toward the forest. He followed them. The trail curved through the trees, weaving past fallen logs and thick underbrush. As he walked deeper, the light dimmed, sounds faded, even the birds stopped chirping. Then, up ahead he saw it, a circle of stones, burned incense sticks, red strings tied to branches, a shrine. Someone had been performing rituals out here. In the center of the stone circle was a small wooden box, incideclums of hair, broken dolls, a tooth. Bo recoiled. Suddenly, a sharp crack behind him. He spun around. Standing at the edge of the trees was a woman in a black veil. Not a ghost, a real woman. She didn't speak, just watched him with eyes that burned with hatred and grief. Then she said, "You shouldn't have found this," and disappeared into the woods. Bo ran back to the village, box in hand. That night, he brought it to the temple. Fgijek examined the contents with grave silence. "These are offerings," he said, "used to trap spirits. Someone tried to bind her, to control her. But why Q? Because a child's soul is easier to twist, easier to manipulate." The monk began preparing a ritual. "We'll try to release them, both the child and the widow." But Bo had a terrible thought. What if she doesn't want to go? Fgijek paused. "Then may the gods protect us all." That night, as the villagers gathered near the pond once more, Bo stood beside the monk, heart pounding. Candles lined the water. Bells rang softly in the distance. The air turned still, and from beneath the surface bubbles rose. Then came a scream high and long. It wasn't Kuei's. It was hers, the widow's spirit, and she was not ready to let go. The faceless man on the dike, and the secret behind father's lies. The night air was thick with humidity as Tin Bo rode his motorbike along the narrow dike road. The rice paddies on both sides shimmered faintly under the half-moonlight, giving the path an eerie glow. The engine hummed steadily beneath him, yet the stillness in the air gnawed at his nerves. He couldn't shake the dream from the night before's face underwater, eyes open but lifeless, mouthing his name. Then the hand reaching out from the pond, and the faceless shadow standing behind it, motionless. That dream had led him to the pond where he found the real hand, the corpse, the mystery. And now, as he rode back from the village committee office, his head filled with questions. Was there hair and fingernails in Kuei's coffin? Who buried the widow with the boy? What curse had been unleashed? Suddenly, just up ahead on the dike road, his headlight caught something. A figure, standing still in the center of the path. He slammed the brakes. The bike screeched, veering slightly sideways, kicking up dust. The beam from the headlight illuminated the figure clearly now. A man, or at least the outline of one, but he had no face. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a smooth expanse of skin where a face should be. Bo froze, gripping the handlebars so tightly his knuckles turned white. The faceless figure didn't move. It simply stood there, as though it had been waiting for him. He tried to speak, to ask who or what it was, but his voice cracked into silence. Then, without warning, the faceless man tilted his head slightly to the side. In that instant, Bo felt a stabbing pain behind his own eyes, like something was being forced into his mind. A whisper echoed in his head, not from his ears, but from deep within. You knew he knew, and he lied. Then, just as suddenly, the figure vanished. One blink it was gone. No sound, no trace. Tin Bo sat motionless for a moment longer, breathing hard. Then he kicked the bike back into gear and raced home, heart pounding. Back in his room, sweat still beading on his forehead. He couldn't sit still. Something about the whisper, the accusation, unsettled him. He went to the locked drawer where his father kept old documents, keys, and paperwork from his time as the village deputy. Over the years, Tin Bo had never touched this drawer, but now he picked the lock with a hairpin and began digging. At the bottom, under files about land boundaries and ancestral graves, he found a yellowed envelope. No name. Inside, one old photograph and a folded piece of paper. The photo was from over 2 decades ago. It showed a group of men standing around a dug-up grave. The grave was shallow. In it, a child's corpse bloated and decomposed. And next to it, a small pile of jewelry, gold chains, earrings, bracelets. Tin Bo squinted. The jewelry looked familiar. He unfolded the paper. It was a confession, half-written, barely legible. It was his father's handwriting. I had to do it. I couldn't say no when they offered. The boy wasn't the right one. We knew. But the family paid well. They wanted closure. We gave them bones. I kept the real story buried. God forgive me. Tin Bo's hand trembled. His father had taken money to fake a burial. And Worsith's body in the grave might not have been who the family thought it was. A fake found body. A boy sacrificed for another family's peace of mind. Bo staggered back. It was all connected. The faceless figure on the dike wasn't just a ghost, it was an echo of guilt. A consequence. A reckoning. His father had told him before dying, "Don't go digging, Bo. Some graves are better left closed." But now he understood. The past was clawing its way back up. He returned to the village records the next morning, quietly, without alerting the elders. In the dusty archives, he searched for any closed cases of missing children around that time 20 years ago. He found it. Name, Lahutat. Age, 7. Status, declared dead after remains found near the old riverbed. Case closed with community blessing. There was a note, body unrecognizable. Identification made via bracelet recovered at site. A bracelet? Bo looked at the photo again. The same bracelet was on the wrist of a woman in the background and of the searchers. She wore it like a trophy. This wasn't an accident. It was a cover-up. Someone had placed those items next to a random body, maybe even one taken fresh. Little stage a discovery. A fake body, a traded soul. Tin Bo felt bile rise in his throat. Who had they buried, and why? That night, the dreams returned, but not of Q. This time, it was his father, standing at the edge of the dike, holding a lantern. He turned to Bo and said, "You know now, you must go to the banyan tree. Dig where the roots curl." Then the sky turned blood red, and the wind howled like screams. Bo woke up drenched in sweat. He dressed immediately and made his way to the ancient banyan tree near the northern fields. The area was deserted. Farmers avoided that place. Site was said to be cursed. With a shovel in hand and a flashlight between his teeth, Bo started to dig. The ground was damp, but not too deep. Simeon had disturbed it before. Soon, the metal tip of the shovel hit something solid. Wood. He dug around it and uncovered a small wooden box. Inside, bones, small, fragile, and a doll, wrapped in red thread. Next to it, a photograph of a boy who looked very much like Q. Bo's chest tightened. Another child. Another buried truth. He took the box and reburied the hole carefully. He didn't want others to stumble upon this. Back home, he compared the photo to an old school album in the village library. The child in the box was Vietnamese boy declared lost just a year before Q was born. No one had ever found his body. Now Bo had. That night, the faceless man came again. But this time, he had a face. It was Bo's father. His mouth opened, whispering, "It was never supposed to go this far. But now that you've found the truth, the dead will not sleep until you make it right." Tin Bo stared in horror. His father's face melted away again, replaced by an empty void. There are more like him, more trades, more lies. They walk among the living. But the debts remain unpaid. Suddenly, Bo felt himself being pulled into the earth, into the graves, into the memories of the dead. Screams echoed around him. He woke up gasping for air, dirt on his hands though he hadn't left the house. The next morning, he made a decision. No more hiding. He would go public with the evidence. But as he stepped out of the house, he noticed something nailed to his front gate. A dead chicken, its blood still fresh. A warning. He was being watched, and someone didn't want the truth revealed. The dead had chosen him as the vessel, and until every lie was unearthed, they would never stop. The abandoned shrine and the death ledger. Tin Bo stood at the entrance of the old shrine, the wooden door half rotted and hanging loosely from its hinges. The air was thick with the smell of decay and damp earth. A soft wind brushed past him, carrying with it the faint sound of chanting though no one else was there. The villagers had always warned children not to go near the shrine on the hill. It was said to be abandoned after a series of sudden deaths in the area decades ago. But Tin Bo had followed a string of leads, dreams, whispers from the elders, and a trail of strange symbols etched into trees, all pointing to this place. His flashlight flickered as he stepped inside. The shrine was surprisingly intact, save for the mold growing along the walls and the overgrown vines pushing through the cracks. The statues of old gods stared at him with blank eyes, faces weathered and cracked. Cobwebs hung like curtains, but Tin Bo pushed through them, determined. At the center of the shrine was an altar, and on it, a thick, leather-bound book. Dust coated its cover, and his fingers trembled as he reached out. The moment he touched it, the atmosphere changed as though the air itself had stopped moving. Names. Pages and pages of names, each one written in neat, ancient handwriting, followed by a date. Some of the names he recognized, villagers who had died over the years, sometimes in mysterious circumstances. But then he saw names of people who were still alive. Mrs. L from the noodle shop, Mr. N who ran the ferry, even little Than, who had just turned 8 last month. And beside each name, a date, future dates. Tin Bo's breath caught in his throat as he flipped to the final page. There, in bold black ink fresher than the rest, was his own name. Tin Bo, August 15th, 2025. That was exactly 1 week away. He stumbled backward, knocking over a wooden offering tray. Candles rolled onto the floor and went out. His heart pounded so loudly that he could hear it echo off the stone walls. "Who wrote this?" he whispered. But deep down, he already knew. This wasn't an ordinary book. It was a death ledger, a cursed artifact that recorded the end of every soul tied to the village. That night, Tin Bo didn't return home. He took shelter at an old abandoned watchtower just outside the village. He didn't want his father to see him like this, terrified, drenched in sweat, eyes haunted. He spread out the photographs and notes he had gathered over the last few weeks. Every strange clue pointed to the same thing. Someone or something was orchestrating these deaths, and the shrine, hidden and ignored for decades, was central to it all. He remembered the face of the woman in his dreams, pale, eyes hollow, lips mouthing silent words. She had shown him images: the grave of the widow, the arm in the pond, the faceless man on the levee. It wasn't just haunting, it was guiding. And now it was warning. The next morning, he returned to the shrine. He wasn't alone this time. An old woman stood by the altar. Her back was turned to him, but her long white hair was unmistakable. "Bahai," he called cautiously. She didn't turn around. "You weren't supposed to see it." Tin Bo stepped closer. "The book." She nodded. "It chooses who it reveals itself to. You're not the first, but most who saw their names lost their minds before the date came." "What is it?" he asked. "A curse. A contract," she replied. "Long ago, when this village suffered drought and plague, our ancestors begged for help. A wandering priest gave them this book. He said it would protect the village, but it came with a price." Tin Bo's voice shook. "A life for a life." She finally turned around. Her eyes were tired, but not unkind. "The names written are offerings. In exchange, the rest of the village is spared." He clenched his fists. "That's why no one speaks about the deaths. That's why they're always sudden, unexplained." She looked at him sadly. "You can try to run. You can even burn the book. But the names always return. The date never changes." He opened his backpack and pulled out a bottle of gasoline. She didn't stop him. She only whispered, "If you destroy it, you may save yourself. But something else, something worse might wake up." The shrine went up in flames before noon. Smoke coiled into the sky like a serpent, and villagers came running from all corners to witness it. No one said a word. The next 2 days were calm, too calm. Then the animals started dying. First the chickens, then the cows. By the 4th night, a dozen dogs had vanished. One was found later with its body twisted unnaturally, eyes blackened. On the 5th night, lightning struck the old bell tower. On the 6th, the river turned cloudy and red. The 7th night was August 14th. Tin Bo sat awake, gripping the amulet his mother had once given him. He prayed, not to any god, but to the spirits he'd ignored for too long. At midnight, the door creaked open. A woman stood there, pale skin, hollow eyes, and long black hair. She pointed toward the hill, back to the shrine. But the shrine was gone. Yet somehow it wasn't. He followed her, and the path felt longer than before. Shadows moved between the trees, and the wind whispered names he didn't recognize. Where the shrine had stood was now a blackened crater, but in the center the book had returned, untouched, not even a scorch mark. The woman knelt beside it. "The contract must continue," she said, "or the whole village will burn." Tin Bo shook his head. "There has to be another way." She looked at him. For the first time, her voice softened. "You were meant to take over. Your father broke the chain years ago by substituting a body. You're the price for that lie." He fell to his knees. "I didn't ask for this," he whispered. "But you inherited it," she said. Suddenly, her body began to fade, dissolving into ash. The book opened by itself. A blank page, and a pen beside it. A choice. He could write a new name, trade a soul, postpone his death, or accept fate. His fingers hovered. Names flashed in his mind, people who wronged him, people he barely knew. And then he closed the book. He took the pen and carved a single sentence onto the cover. No more. Then he buried it under the ashes and walked away, unsure of what tomorrow would bring. But as dawn broke over the cursed village, no one died. Not yet. They don't want to be found spirits on the run. Tin Bo hadn't slept in 2 nights, ever since he opened the old notebook from the abandoned shrine. Every dream had turned into a nightmare. But it wasn't just bad dreams, these were visitations. The people whose names were listed in that cursed book, some already dead, some still alive, came to him, not to plead, not to beg. They came to warn. That night, as he drifted into a restless sleep on the wooden bench in his study, it began again. He stood in a thick fog. The air smelled of mold, wet soil, and something faintly metallic. Blood. Figures loomed around him, pale and gaunt, but none dared step forward. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, but they didn't speak. Then one voice cut through the silence. "You shouldn't be looking for us." Tin Bo turned. A woman stood behind him, half her face decayed, hair long and tangled like it had been buried for years. He recognized her. It was the widow whose grave had been desecrated days ago. "They brought me back, dug me up, touched what should have stayed untouched," she rasped. "Now I'm not whole anymore." More figures appeared. A child with bloated features from drowning, a man with half a skull, an old lady whose back was twisted like a broken tree branch. "They're chasing us, making us remember. Let us rest," someone shouted from the fog. Then Tin Bo was pulled, sucked down into the earth, arms grabbing him from below, mouths whispering, "You broke the barrier, you broke the barrier, you broke." He jolted awake, gasping, soaked in sweat. The notebook lay shut on the table, but the last Nemehis name was now written in darker ink, as if it had deepened overnight. Later that morning, Tin Bo walked out to the front yard, his legs weak. An old woman selling incense sticks at the corner looked up and said quietly, "You shouldn't search for what doesn't want to be found." He froze. "What did you say?" She gave a crooked smile. "I said you look pale. Boy, maybe burning an offering would help." But she never broke eye contact. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. That afternoon, he went to see FINDER, the local spirit medium. "You want answers, but you don't know the question yet," FINDER said, as he prepared the altar. "You dream of the dead, but have you ever asked if they dream of you?" Tin Bo remained silent, unsure how to respond. FINDER placed a bowl of water on the altar and lit 3 joss sticks. The flame flickered violently, though there was no wind. Then, dark shapes began to swirl in the water, faces, dozens of them. "They're not angry," FINDER murmured. "They're afraid." "Of me?" Bo asked. "No, of being found." That night, the dreams changed. They were no longer just shadows pulling at him. They showed him things. A shallow grave behind the abandoned school, a well covered with cement, a man dropping something heavy off a bridge during a thunderstorm. He woke up at 3:13 a.m., shivering. But something told him it wasn't a dream. These were memories. Not his, but borrowed from those who had died. It was as if they were saying, "You want to know, then carry the burden we couldn't." But another part of the message was clearer. "Stop looking. You're making it worse." 2 days later, the first tragedy hit. A young boy in the village, barely 6, started sleepwalking. Every night at exactly 2 a.m., he'd walk barefoot toward the riverbank, whispering a name no one recognized. When his parents finally stopped him, he screamed and bit his father's arm, yelling, "Let me go. They're calling me." The boy's name wasn't in the book, but the name he whispered was. It was one of the drowned souls, someone Tin Bo had already written a report about. Bo's heart sank. Was he pulling innocent lives into the curse? More followed. A woman started hallucinating her dead husband standing at the foot of the bed. An elder man claimed someone knocked on his window every night. When asked who, he said, "My brother. But I buried him myself 30 years ago." Then one night, in another dream, Tin Bo found himself walking into a dark cave. It wasn't symbolic. It felt Ralph's smell of moss, the cold bite of the air. At the end of the cave was a pool, black and unmoving. And in the reflection, he didn't see himself. He saw a different version of him, covered in dirt, skin pale like the corpses he had seen. And it spoke. "If you keep doing this, you won't return. One day, your soul will wander just like ours." The final sign came on a quiet morning. Tin Bo woke up with soil under his fingernails and a bruise on his ankle. He had no idea how it happened. But outside his house, someone had drawn a symbol in ash, a circle with 3 slashes crossing it. He didn't recognize it, but the NCM did. "It's an old warding mark," he said. "Not to protect you, to warn them about you. Them. The dead." Bo stared in horror. "You mean, the spirits think I'm dangerous?" The NCM looked at him gravely. "You've walked their path too far. You're not one of them, but not quite among the living anymore either. That book you found, it wasn't meant to be opened. It was sealed for a reason." For the first time, Tin Bo questioned his mission. What was he really doing? He thought he was helping bringing peace to families, finding lost bones, giving closure. But maybe the dead had their reasons for staying hidden. Maybe the land remembered things better left buried. And maybe, just maybe, the boy he was trying to find, the first missing soul who started this journey, didn't want to be found at all. The next night, Tin Bo lit a single candle in the center of his room. Around him, he placed the offerings, salt, rice, a bowl of water, and incense. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the dark. "If I crossed a line, show me. If I need to stop, I will. But if you still need me, give me a sign." Nothing happened at first. Then the candle flickered. The incense curled in a strange spiral. And in the silence, a whisper brushed his ear. "One more. When the body seeker becomes the one being sought." For weeks, Tin Bo had been chasing ghosts literally and figuratively. Each missing child, every hidden grave, every whispered secret of the village's dark past had left its mark on him. The notebook, the faceless man, the dreams that haunted his every waking moment. Yet, despite his fear, he pressed on, driven by a need to uncover the truth, to bring rest to the restless. But the truth has a price. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and shadows stretched across the village, Tin Bo disappeared. No one saw him leave. No one heard from him. Panic rippled through the village by dawn. The families of the missing began to ask questions. Who would find their children now? Who would bring peace to the restless souls? In desperation, they turned to the one person they thought could help, father of Tin Bo, the village's renowned Gi Kung, the skilled spiritual guide. The old man sat in his dimly lit room, fingers trembling as he lit incense sticks. His eyes, clouded with age and sorrow, searched the smoky air as he muttered prayers. He hadn't seen his son for days, and he feared what had happened. The villagers crowded outside his home, voices trembling between hope and dread. "Please, Gi Kung," one woman pleaded. "Find him. Find my child." The old man nodded slowly, placing a hand on the wooden table cluttered with talismans and sacred texts. "I will try," he said, voice weary but resolute. Meanwhile, deep in the woods beyond the village, Tin Bo wandered. He couldn't say how he'd gotten there. One moment he was at home, the next, The earth beneath him gave way, swallowing him into darkness. The air was thick, heavy, almost suffocating. He reached out blindly and felt rough stone beneath his fingersed walls of a crypt, an ancient tomb. His heart hammered as he realized he was trapped underground, and worse was not alone. Whispers echoed through the damp air. Cold hands brushed his arms. Shadows flickered in the corners of his vision. Then a voice, soft, cold, beckoning. Tin Bo. He spun around, but saw only darkness. "Why do you seek us?" the voice hissed. "Why do you dig where you should not?" The answer came without thought. To find the truth. Days passed above ground without any sign of him. His family grew frantic, and the villagers whispered stories about the curse of the body seeker. Those who disturb the dead must join them, they said. At night, the Thgi Kung held rituals, calling to the spirits, hoping for a sign. Flames flickered on the altar as he chanted, beads sliding through his fingers. Then, a vision. His son, trapped between worlds, his face pale and gaunt. Underground, Tin Bo fought exhaustion. He crawled through narrow passages, chased by cold whispers and unseen figures. The spirits were angered not just by his intrusion, but by their own forced restlessness. They wanted to be left alone, yet they needed him to hear their stories. In one chamber, he found a skeleton draped in ancient robes, clutching a rusted dagger. Beside it, a faded inscription. "The past is a chain. Break one link, and all shall fall." Tin Bo understood. Every discovery, every body found, was breaking the fragile seal between the living and the dead. The spirits were warning Hyman, punishing him. Meanwhile, above ground, the Thgi Kung followed the faintest clues. He traced ancient symbols carved into trees and stones near the village outskirts. In the moonlight, he found a hidden entrance to an old burial cave, half covered by earth and roots. He prepared the sacred offerings and began the ritual to call his son back. Below, Tin Bo's strength waned. He clutched a pendant his mother gave him, a charm against evil, and whispered prayers, taught by his father. Suddenly, a cold presence filled the chamber. A figure appeared, a woman in white, her eyes hollow but full of sorrow. "You have disturbed our rest," she said, voice like the wind through dry leaves. "But I seek only to help," Tin Bo pleaded. She shook her head. "You must pay the price." Outside, the Thgi Kung's chants grew louder, more desperate. A sudden tremor shook the earth as the ground above the burial cave shifted. The villagers gathered, watching as a pale light glowed from the entrance. Below, Tin Bo felt himself pulled toward the light. The woman reached out her hand. "Come," she whispered. He hesitated, then grasped it. Suddenly, he was surrounded by bright white light. He woke up on the ground near the village edge, gasping for air. His father knelt beside him, tears streaming. "You are back," the old man said, "but the spirits are not at peace." Tin Bo nodded weakly. "I have seen their pain," he said, "and I understand now. We must stop." Together, father and son went to the village elders. They told the story of curses, the broken seals, the restless spirits. The villagers listened, some fearful, some skeptical, but all agreed the past could not be ignored any longer. In the days that followed, Tin Bo and his father performed ceremonies. They cleansed the graves, prayed for the lost souls, and sealed the disturbed ground with sacred herbs and prayers. Slowly, the village felt a shift. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. The nightmares lessened. The restless spirits seemed to find peace. One evening, as Tin Bo stood near the pond where the boy Q was last seen, a gentle breeze stirred the water. For the first time in months, he felt a calm. He whispered, "Rest now." The wind whispered back, and the night was silent. The fate of the body seeker. Not everyone wants to know the truth. The village had never felt colder. The heavy mist clung to the earth like a shroud, chilling every corner. Even the brave few who ventured out whispered prayers under their breath. The air was thick with unease, as if the very ground held its breath waiting. And it was waiting for one final secret to be uncovered. It was Tinbo's father who found him. Not alive, not even restless, just cold, in the 13th grave. A grave that had been disturbed only weeks before by his own son's hands. The old man stood by the freshly dug earth, his hands trembling as he lifted the wooden lid of the coffin. Inside, the body was as pale as moonlight, eyes closed as if sleeping. But the stillness was unnatural. Beside the body lay the infamous notebook, its leather cover cracked and worn. But something was different. A new line had been written on the last page in handwriting familiar and chilling. "You have seen what your father always hid." The villagers gathered silently, afraid to speak, afraid to look. Whispers spread quickly. What had the Thgikung hidden? Why was his own son buried in the cursed earth? The questions piled on like the autumn leaves that rustled underfoot. 2 weeks before, Tinbo had been consumed by a new obsession, a final truth he believed would free them all. He had discovered an old ledger hidden deep within the village's archives, a record so old it was nearly lost to time. It detailed a pact made centuries ago between the village elders and a dark spirit, a pact sealed by blood and silence, in exchange for protection from famine and war. The villagers had agreed to offer a chosen soul every few generations, a guardian, who would bridge the world of the living and the dead. That guardian was the body seeker. Tinbo's father, in his youth, had taken on that role without knowing it. He had hidden the truth from everyone, especially from his son, to protect him. But by uncovering the past, Tinbo had unknowingly accepted the mantle. The price was his life. The old man remembered the night his son disappeared, the terrified look in his eyes, the desperate prayers whispered into the wind. He understood now. The curse was not just a story, it was a legacy. And Tinbo had paid it in full. That night, under a sky heavy with stars, the village held a silent vigil. The Thgikung performed the final rites, his voice steady despite the tears that streaked his weathered face. He prayed not only for his son's soul, but for the village, for the living and the dead. But the story did not end there. As the coffin was lowered into the earth, the Thgikung opened the notebook one last time. The final page had a blank line waiting. He hesitated. Then, with a steady hand, he wrote, "Let the cycle end." A soft wind rose, stirring the graves around them. The villagers felt a shift, a gentle release, like the last breath of a long-held secret. The restless spirits seemed to find peace. The curse lifted. Yet, in the deepest shadows, a faint whisper echoed. Not everyone wants the truth. And so, the village remained forever marked by the sacrifices of the body seeker, the guardian between worlds, a place where the living learned that some mysteries are better left buried, and where the silence of the dead speaks loudest of all.